So the background was that we wanted to deal with the leftist nostalgia about the Soviet Union, to dissect that a little bit. We wanted to deal with basically with post-histoire, I would call it. So like the death of the big tales. So it's an old idea of postmodernism. So what happened to historiography? So and the interesting part is if you combine the history of Soviet Unterzögersdorf, our fake country, and the history of the JSSR, for example, and the history of Austria, the most reasonable and most real sounding one is the one of our fake country. So if you take the history of Austria in the last 50 years, it's really bizarre. It's really bizarre what happened there with all the scandals and all the stuff. So the history of our fake communist country, outside of Schengen border control, of course, it's out of Schengen control, of course. It sounds really realistic compared to Austria, for example. And then, of course, we wanted to deal with the so-called Austrian history, the real history that everybody talks about and tells you about. And in 1955, there was the big liberation, the right-wing and conservative Austrians call it, because after 10 years of Allied occupation and, of course, of Soviet occupation, Austria was really free again. Free. And the interesting part is that, of course, there is this really interesting history, because you can imagine what the Nazis told the Austrians and the Germans about the Soviet Union and the people living in the Soviet Union. And there is still a really big tradition of thinking the worst about people from the East and from Russia and the former Soviet zone. So it's really interesting that you confront people that may still live, like people in the age of my grandparents that still live in Unterzögersdorf, to confront them with the whole village suddenly being occupied by people dressed up in Soviet military uniforms and walking around and showing tourists how great communism is and stuff like that, and that they are really proud that Unterzögersdorf could stay Soviet after 1955 and not going back to Austria and stuff like that. So that's the basic background. So the project started with a theater performance, and then last year we thought we want to do a sequel to this idea of Soviet Unterzögersdorf, and we thought an interesting idea is to make an adventure game out of it, because an adventure game, adventure games like Maniac Mansion and Zack McCracken and Space Quest and all that stuff. So because adventure games are basically that form of computer games. So I think there's only 1% of computer games at the moment published are adventure games, and I mean the computer gaming industry is really big. I mean it's billions and billions of dollars, and there's only a tiny segment, 1%, of adventure games being sold. And we thought, that's really interesting. So there's a dead computer gaming format, and there's this dead concept of state communism or the Soviet Union, and we wanted to combine those. And the resolution of the game, for example, is only 640 times 480, so it's a small resolution compared to nowadays 2000 times whatever computer resolutions. But it's a really bizarre, darkish, strange game. Of course, it's I think it's funny.
And how do you? Is it intended to be distributed? Or
yes. It's. I think it's one of the first Creative Commons computer games out there. So it was featured on Boing, and we had, I think, it was really, we knew, because the game itself is 120 megabytes, including the MP3s and the sound formats and all the stuff. And we thought, okay, if many people are downloading it from our server, we have to put it away because we can't pay for it. So we asked a local internet provider to put it on their page, and we set up the download page on their page. And I think within 1.5 months, they had only on our page, I think 5.5 terabytes of downloads. So it was really immense, and it was the internet game of the month in November in the Edge magazine, and the Edge magazine is really like the that's like the Oscar of computer gaming, and we were really proud, and that was one of the reasons why it was downloaded so much, of course. And yeah, and Transmediale invited us to present the computer game there. So there's a place where you can play the computer game, and it's only the first part, so we are still working on part number 2. But it's really downloadable from the internet.